All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining our webinar with Christians United for Israel. We have an amazing privilege to have an amazing guest speaker with us today. His name is Aryeh Lightstone. Aryeh is the advisor to Ambassador David Friedman, who is the U.S. ambassador to Israel. He has worked hand in hand with the ambassador for all of the Israel initiatives done under the Trump administration. Aryeh, it is such a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you for all of those who are out there listening and participating. We are living in interesting times, and to be able to pause from either doing nothing, which some people are doing, I strongly discourage that, or doing so much, which I do encourage, but taking this opportunity to learn and to grow, and hopefully we can be inspired together in order to strengthen the U.S.-Israel relationship. I know that there is not an organization out there that promotes the U.S. interest of a strong U.S.-Israel relationship better than Christians United for Israel. Your conference is one of my favorite things to appear at every year. I know it is my boss, Ambassador David Friedman's favorite conference to come and appear at and to speak at amongst all the places that we get to go. So kudos to all of you for your work, not just at the conference, but around the year, to be able to successfully strengthen the U.S.-Israel relationship. So we're sitting in complicated times, and I want to explain what that means. We're now 6.5 weeks, more or less, under quasi-lockdown here in Israel. And I'm going to explain sort of what that means from the U.S. policy and what we're doing together with Israel now, hand in hand. But I also want to explain what it means to us as people, because we're not just policy, we're people as well. And through every rainstorm, you try to find the rainbow if you can. And this does not in any way minimize the loss of life and the sickness and the loss of livelihood that has occurred. This has been a very challenging situation, not just for the U.S. and for Israel, but for people around the world. And we pray and continue to pray for the ending of this. But I don't join with everybody else in praying for a return to normal. I think that the opportunity that we've been given here now is an opportunity to re-reflect and decide whether what was normal, whether that was really what we should be striving for. And perhaps we should be striving for different, perhaps we should be striving for greater, perhaps we should take these moments that we've been given for self-improvement and make sure that they are not just for these moments, but they're really concretized to make us stronger people. And why do I say that? Normally, I'll give you a whole story about my background. I'll give you just 30 seconds. So those of you who we have not had a chance yet to meet have at least a sense of who's talking to you, but also because I really want to have a different angle in terms of that normal introduction that I give today. So I'm from Denver, Colorado. Grew up there, fourth generation Colorado, and one of the only Jewish, certainly one of the only observant families when my mother was growing up. When I was growing up, it became a more robust Jewish community. Moved to New York for school, and the number one upside out of that was I had an opportunity to meet my wife, and we lived in the New York area for about 12 years until we were offered this amazing opportunity by Ambassador David and Tammy Friedman to come and join them to help strengthen the U.S.-Israel relationship at our embassy now in Jerusalem, if you haven't heard. And there's an unsung story about that, because people hear a lot about Secretary Pompeo or Ambassador Friedman, and to a lesser extent to myself and other people who work at my level. But there's a story that goes along with the family, sometimes the wife and sometimes the husband, who support those people. And moving to D.C. is a challenge enough. Picking up and moving to a foreign country, no matter how much you like that country, admire that country, and are inspired by that country, it's different to visit than it is to go ahead and to move there. And I always give credit to my wife and my kids for when we were given this opportunity. It was not at the right time for us. The right time, for numerous different reasons, it wasn't, quote unquote, the right time from a rational perspective. But when I expressed the opportunity to my wife, just to let her know that the opportunity had existed based upon Ambassador Friedman offering me and my family to come with him to Israel on this exciting adventure, I was really prepared for a no, because that's what a rational person would do. All the things going on in our life 4 years ago made this decision, what I thought a fairly easy decision, to say just the timing is not right. And my wife said, you don't get to pick the timing of opportunities when they're sent your way. And therefore, it is your job to fix the timing to meet the opportunity. And when she said that, that was a very profound comment. And we fixed the timing in order to meet this opportunity. And every day I thank God and then thank my wife, sometimes in reverse order, for having the insight to know that this was the right opportunity, and our judgment of timing was not correct. And every single day that we've been here has been exciting, an adventure, a challenge. And that brings me to 6.5 weeks ago. And you would assume that a job such as mine, which involves meeting with Israelis all the time, bringing Americans out and educating them on how to further strengthen this relationship and what the benefits are to the U.S. Of this relationship, would be significantly diminished. And I'd be sitting here. I don't sit still very well. I don't take to not doing stuff and checking stuff off my to-do list very well. And the first 2-3 days were complicated and a major struggle, because bordering on boredom. And then again realized that we don't take opportunities and fit them into our timing. So I took my large to-do list that I had for the month of March, April, and May, and I crossed it out and I put it aside. And it's there to work on once we get back to whatever, again, not normal, but whatever the new normal is going to be. And I wrote a new to-do list. What will this opportunity give to us to be able to be stronger in the things that we need to do? And I'll just share with you just a couple of those. The very first one was commit to have dinner with my wife and kids at least 5 nights out of the week, out of the 7 nights. And this probably sounds like poor fathering, and it probably is. But since 2015, I don't believe that 10 days have gone by without me being on an airplane or for some reason having to be away for business or work or not for profit for at least a night a week. I don't remember, mostly because of New York traffic, being home for dinner with my children on nights that did not involve the Sabbath or a Jewish holiday. I just don't recall it happening. I'm sure it did happen every once in a while, but it certainly was not frequent, and certainly was not consistent. Made a commitment to sit down and to study the Bible and to study math and to study geography with each one of my kids, because I enjoy those subjects. And instead of having a teacher do it, to be able to do that and to see and reach out with them. And why did I pick those things? Because those were the things I was able to do with the time that I normally spent sitting in a car. So I said, instead of sitting in the car, I'm going to do something that I wouldn't normally have the opportunity to do. So here it is. And now what am I going to do with the rest of the chunk of my day in order to make sure that we're continuing to strengthen the U.S.-Israel relationship? Well, I'm going to move into what's current and what's relevant. And we set up a task force here to be able to make sure that the best practices that are happening in Israel in fighting the COVID-19, the coronavirus, are being transported to the United States of America immediately with no bureaucracy in the way. So if Israel has something that works, the United States of America will have that something that works. And we tried to set up a reciprocal system on the U.S. side, that if the U.S. has something that works, Israel will then have something that works. And it's not an exclusive relationship. I've explained this in a couple of presentations that I've made. The United States and Israel have a relationship that is the envy of the entire world. But it doesn't mean that it's exclusive. It means that other countries should strive to have that level of relationship. And this is, if you were to ask a parent, if you have a second kid, by having a third kid, have you lost an amount of love for your first and second kid? Of course not. You've actually strengthened that. We welcome so many other countries to join into this special relationship. It elevates all of us. And therefore, the special relationship of this immediate sharing of communication was not limited to the United States and Israel, but expanded to many, many, many other countries, and has succeeded successfully. Obviously, there is no cure today, but there are best practices that have saved thousands, if not tens of thousands of lives. And now many countries, and certainly many states, have pivoted to now, how do people reopen the country? And there are numerous different technological advancements that have happened here in Israel and continue to happen here in Israel that I've shared immediately upon receiving them, both with the White House Task Force, as well as with individual states who may be opening up at different paces and would be in need or find these technologies of value. And here the key is, how do we open up and be able to establish economies, jobs, education, livelihood, all of the things that make the world that we know work in a meaningful way. And because we have such a broad, open world, we have to go ahead and figure out how do we make this information travel as fast as humanly possible. Now, most of you who work in the business sector or who are students or who are homemakers say this is an insane proposition. What in the world are you possibly doing? If there's good information over in place A, and you have email or WhatsApp or a phone call, why isn't it immediately in place B? And the answer to that is just because you have good ideas or good policy doesn't mean that that gets transmitted effectively and quickly to the other bureaucracy, to the other policymakers. And there's a special sauce to be able to get through all of the red tape in order to make sure that the real decision makers have the real data in front of them in real time to be able to make those real decisions effectively. That's the case. Also, as I'm looking at the screen right now, I've discovered that the eagle's wings on our signal actually look like wings that I have. So I'm going to readjust that because that's awkward looking for a moment. I'm not positive that got better. Anyways, why do I have this sign behind me? You should know that this sign is the first sign that ever was placed inside the United States Embassy of America in Jerusalem that has the words on it, Jerusalem, Israel. And it was temporary based upon the opening. I'll maybe even share the story of the opening of the embassy in a couple moments. But as it went out, just a couple of us bought it days before we were opening because we discovered we had a great signage on the outside. But assuming somebody walks into the ambassador's office on day number one, we don't have any signage yet done on the inside. So it's very flimsy. It's not a quality material, but it's very nostalgic in that it's the first sign ever in the embassy in Jerusalem inside that sat in the ambassador's office. And so when we replace it with a real sign, I brought it to my house until we have to give it back to the embassy when we leave. Hopefully it'll make its way into a museum at some point in time. But so I try to keep that behind me for all talks because it's very special, regardless of the funny position with my head in the eagle's wings at this very moment. Anyways, so we've spent an enormous amount of time working on making sure that the way we treat current information that we find here in Israel gets back to the United States of America, and that research dollars in the U.S. That can help advance different ideas and successes here in Israel, and research dollars in Israel that can help advance different research ideas and opportunities in America can move quickly. And the difference in between being able to get something done in 24 hours versus a month is quite literally the difference in between tens of thousands of lives and livelihoods. And so we believe that time is of the essence, and we're working together with a team camaraderie that really has taken 3 years to develop meaningfully. So that's sort of what we spend time doing. And I now want to go back for a moment to discuss how excited I am to be here for Christians United for Israel. But I'd like to broaden that, because I think oftentimes that there is a feeling that there's a monopoly or a monopoly is not the right word, but that the reason that the U.S. has this special relationship with Israel is exclusively based upon values. It's exclusively based upon Judeo-Christian heritage. It's exclusively based upon America defending Israel, who's sort of the light unto the nations in a very gloomy part of the world. All of those things are true, and all of those things have incredible value. But what's important, and I'd like to see organizations like this start, I'd like to see an organization that says Americans United for Israel, because the case that we try to make for people who don't share the same Judeo-Christian values, who don't share that same sense of heritage, who don't share the fact that Israel is sitting out on an island, figuratively, fighting fights that would be coming to America if they were not fought over here in Israel, that there's a reciprocity of the U.S.-Israel relationship that for those people who don't pay attention to it may miss it. And that's because a lot of it flows behind the scenes. Did you know that the third most amount of listed companies on NASDAQ come from Israel? We're actually right now compiling a report of the amount of Americans who have jobs based upon Israeli technology and innovation today in America. And it's not a small amount. It's a enormous amount. And as we pull through this COVID-19 both in terms of how we reopen our cities, our states, ultimately our countries, and our jobs, and our entertainment venues, and our places of worship, and the ways that we get back to, again, not normal, but the new normal. The way to do that is going to have to involve meaningful and exponential opportunities for new jobs in new industries with new abilities, with new excitement. And much of that innovation comes here from Israel. So when I tell people that I am completely and totally head over heels pro-Israel, it's not because of the Judeo-Christian values, and it's not because of the shared heritage, and it's not because of the island that Israel sits on defending the values in this crazy part of the world. All of that happens to be true, but that is not the exclusive reason. I am because I am a unapologetic pro-America. This is the relationship that we have with Israel. Every moment that we strengthen that U.S.-Israel relationship is a complete and total strengthening of the United States of America. And again, normally we see this in the context of intelligence sharing, of military training, of stuff that normally doesn't make the papers. And now we're seeing it from a completely other angle of stuff that doesn't make the papers. The amount of time that we're communicating back and forth about innovations in vaccines and in techniques to open up the government, and techniques to open up the cities, the states, and the countries is truly magnificent. And I would tell you that 98% of the research papers that I've seen out of Israeli universities on the best way to distribute a vaccine, on the best way to produce a vaccine, on the best way to open up a state, does not address what Israel should be doing. 98% of the research papers that I've seen, now granted that's from a limited amount and they've come to my desk, so I'm not saying 98% of the research papers in Israel, but 98% of the research papers that I have seen from Israeli researchers have focused on how do they benefit America, which is a profound comment for us to understand profoundly. That was redundant, I apologize, but it's an important comment for us to understand. Why? Because Israel understands that Israel is stronger when you have a stronger America. When Israel sees America struggling through COVID-19 like the entire world is, their first concern is not for the state of Israel. It's smaller. It is used to living in a crisis situation. It knows how to hunker down for a period of time. There's really only one major ingress and egress, only one major airport that needs to be controlled to understand where this stuff is. Israel has tremendous confidence of its ability to get through a crisis. It sat and immediately channeled much of its efforts to how does it help get America through this crisis, which again is something in America. Would we be fine with that, Israel? Yeah, we would be fine. But are we significantly better because Israel views us also as an inseparable ally? 100% we are. So I would tell you during this time that it is extremely important that you focus on your values, our shared values, the shared values in between the United States of America and Israel, prayer and deep thought, and the new to-do list that we've got during these times. How are we strengthening ourselves as people, ourselves as families, ourselves as communities, in order to be able to ultimately better strengthen the U.S.-Israel alliance? I'll share two other comments, vignettes, if you will, on what we've been doing during this challenging time, and then share with you maybe one interesting perspective, and then would love to open it up to questions. The two vignettes that have been extremely interesting to me have been not the first 2 to 3 days of lockdown, but I'd say the 10 days to 2 weeks that followed that were filled with Americans and Israelis all over the world trying to get back to their respective homes. Israelis in the Far East, Israelis in Central America, Israelis in South America, Americans in Africa, Americans in the Middle East, Americans in Eastern Europe, trying to get back to America. And because we're the U.S. Embassy, and apparently more people than I thought have my cell phone number and email address, people would be calling at literally all hours of the night. And the most interesting thing that happened was there was no distinction whether you were an Israeli or an American in terms of the willingness of all of the people in the chain of command to help people get to where they could ultimately be safe. Doesn't mean America prioritized an Israeli over an American. It doesn't mean that Israel prioritized an American over an Israeli. But for a brief period of time, there was a sense where bureaucracy is normally the strongest, that the goal by everybody involved in every one of those conversations was to tear down the bureaucracy in order to go ahead and to strengthen the individuals to get to their countries where they could be with their families and with their sense of safety. And if you could have been on those conversations, and again, people call me all the time when they've got a visa issue or a passport issue and they're stuck in lots of different countries, and most of the time sort of shrug my shoulders and I help them because that's my job to help them, but the bureaucracy is just painful. There is no magic wand that you can suddenly wave. But for those couple of days, there was something that resembled a magic wand where when you called, people picked up, and when they said they'd get back to you, they got back to you immediately. And when there was a question of, can we go ahead and move this paperwork faster than the regular time to be able to do so, it was there. And so I would tell you, this gave me great optimism for us and our ability to get through this. And I still share this enormous optimism for our ability to get through this in a meaningful way. I would humbly suggest that the way to do that best is for us to gain a little bit of humility in terms of how we address some of these challenges, and realize that the person who's making a decision on the other line is also a human being. And there are a lot of very significant decisions that are being made on the city and the state level, and there are different sides to all of those opinions. We'll all get through this much better if we can have that. I know what Christians United for Israel preaches, which is love for the person on the other end, no matter how much we may disagree with him or her. But I think that this is a time for tremendous empathy and caring for everybody that we can, and I was able to see that firsthand in a very, very meaningful way as we were repatriating people. And I would tell you this is the last vignette that I will leave you with, and then take questions. I'm a political appointee by President Trump. I work for Ambassador Friedman, who is a very well-known political appointee. The steps that the president, along with Senior Advisor Jared Kushner and Special Representative Avi Berkowitz, and my boss, Ambassador David Friedman, have taken to strengthen the U.S.-Israel relationship are just unbelievable. Unbelievable. I mean, it's what's been accomplished in 3 years you couldn't have imagined in 3 terms. It's just been a march towards strengthening the U.S. and our interests, and that means in this case embracing Israel in a very meaningful way as we get embraced back. And it's been wonderful to see. But on occasion there's politics that gets involved, not with us, but people come to the embassy, and it's very popular to go ahead and take a picture by the plaque. And we were taking a picture by the plaque, which it doesn't look like this. This is above the plaque. There's a plaque that has the president's name and the vice president's name and the ambassador's name on it. And we were pausing to take a picture, and a lady looks behind and she turns around and says, "Not my president," and she walks out of the picture. And it was just such an interesting thing that was confusing to me, because there's a lot of passion about my president, not my president. I didn't know you get to select your president. You vote and you get your president. That's who you get. You're not my president. So anyways, we walked into the office and I changed my briefing that I normally give. And I said, there's an unsung hero. I think in the last 6 weeks, we've discovered that healthcare workers who we've always loved and appreciated need to be loved more and appreciated more. Frontline workers, truck drivers, sanitation engineers, all there's a greater appreciation for people who do stuff that we don't necessarily see. And here I spoke about an unsung person. It's the embassy operator. Our embassy operators, every embassy and consulate around the world receives millions of phone calls a year. And you know what they don't say? When the person calls, they don't say, "Who did you vote for?" They don't even say, "Did you vote?" They didn't ask if you paid your taxes. They didn't ask if you're interested in paying your taxes. They don't ask if you're a felon. You know what they ask you? Are you an American? And if the answer to that is yes, then the amount of hoops that the United States embassies and consulates will jump through in order to help you with your issues are enormous. Your passport is one of the most impressive documents you will ever own. And the pride that you should have, when I put on my pin with the U.S. flag, this is the only uniform that I've ever worn, and in all likelihood is the only uniform that I ever will wear. but to know that you represent the United States of America that has that power and influence around the world is really the most incredible thing. And it's not the time for belittling, not my president. I mean, you've taken the flag, you've taken the symbol, you've taken the plaque, you've taken our embassy in Jerusalem and tried to reduce it to politics. And I will tell you this, everybody I've had the privilege of working with, my boss, the ambassador, and senior advisor Kushner, and special representative Berkowitz, have made decisions not once based upon politics, but every single time based upon the policy of what's best for the United States of America. And when we put on this flag, it's not a Republican flag, it's not a Democratic flag, it's not a Jewish flag, it's not a Christian flag, it's the flag of the United States of America. And I can't tell you what type of pride I've got to wake up in the morning, every morning, with enthusiasm to check off something else on that to-do list to strengthen the United States of America. And I'm doubly blessed that by strengthening the United States of America, I get to do it through the vehicle of strengthening the great state of Israel and working with my boss, again, if I can give him one more shout out, Ambassador David Friedman, a finer person I've never known, a finer person I've never had the privilege of working for. And to be able to do that is just, I'm blessed that my wife said, we don't get to pick the timing when opportunities come our way. Take the opportunity, and that's what we're doing, and I fully encourage all of you to do that. I have gone on much longer than anticipated, so I apologize for that. I think we're going to turn it over for Q&A.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Lightstone. It is such an honor to have you with us, such valuable information and talking about us as America working with Israel, and it's such a blessing with that. So everyone, we are now turning this over to questions. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen. It should literally say Q&A. So it is pretty easy, just type it in and we'll get to them. The first question is, also, by the way, we have a lot of people saying they love the seal behind you, so it is definitely really cool to be able to see that. But the first question is, in America, we have high unemployment due to the coronavirus issue. How is Israel handling the economy and unemployment during this time?
It's a major challenge. Israel's unemployment has spiked slightly less on a percentage basis to the United States of America, but it may very well catch up. If you look at Israel, tourism is an enormous component of the economy. And that means hotels and the cab drivers and the restaurants and the tour sites and all the things that normally when you guys come and when I come as my family want to be able to see and to experience. It's a major challenge. It really is a major challenge. The high-tech sector, which has been able to carry Israel in a meaningful way, mostly is able to work during these challenging times. So there's still money coming into the country from the high-tech sector. And therefore, if you're a trickle-down person, they're spending money. There's more takeout than has ever been served in this country before. That means there are more takeout drivers. But if you're a cab driver, you'll never make those days back. If you are a hotel, you can't then rebook those rooms. I would challenge all of you guys, and normally I leave with this, but I'll challenge you because I think it's a great response to this particular question. You're all going to book a vacation at some point in time in the next period of time. You probably had one that was booked and was canceled. You are also going through financially challenging times. I'm going through a financially challenging time. I don't know anybody who's woken up this morning and feels as confident as they did 10 weeks ago. But this is not the time to wave the white flag or to sort of lie down. This is the time to dig deep and reinvest in America. I would encourage you, your next vacation, pick a place in America that you have not been, but save up for that trip to Israel. If you had a trip to Israel, don't you dare cancel that trip. Postpone that trip. Rebook that trip for the fall. There will be deals that will be coming. There will be an opportunity. And if you haven't seen your embassy in Jerusalem, you're missing out on a historic opportunity to be able to do so. I would strongly encourage you to do that. But instead of buying that new laptop or whatever else it was going to be, we all have a bucket of money that we try to allocate. Invest in yourself. And by doing so, go to a place in America that you haven't been before, if that's what your budget allows. And if you can add on to that a trip to Israel, I would encourage you to do that. If you can't do that, go to 2 places in America. But we're the people who are going to go ahead and rebuild our economies together.
Wonderful. That is absolutely such an amazing message that we're going to work together in this crisis. We have a couple more questions. One of them is from a viewer. She says she Worked as an undergraduate at the University of Georgia. She's an Israel advocate to this present day. She's currently in Jerusalem, at the university in Jerusalem, Hebrew University. She's returning to the States in the summer. She says, upon my return, what opportunities are available to further strengthen the U.S. and Israeli relationship?
Oh my goodness, we're going to have to do 4 more webinars in a row. First of all, thank you. There's not a more committed group of people than the people who are listening right now. And I have to tell you, I'm in awe of what you guys do and always striving for more, but continue to strive for more. Number 1 is pick when you are going to return here and return with somebody who does not think like you. It's very easy to come back with somebody who thinks like you. It really is very easy. But to come back with somebody who does not think like you and introduce them to Israel and the U.S.-Israel relationship in the way that only you can, because it's through your eyes, help them see it through their eyes. That's one thing that every single person who cares like you guys care did that, every 3 years for the next 9 years, the U.S.-Israel relationship would have a much stronger foundation. It has a good foundation, but the foundation would be much stronger. The second thing is, I am told that the numbers are not trending in our favor demographically in terms of faith-believing people and their strong commitment to the U.S.-Israel relationship. You sound like you are of the age where you can go back and mentor, reach out to Bible schools, to high schools, to clubs, to youth groups, and to mentor them and explain why the U.S.-Israel relationship is well worth their time and what they can gain from it. It sounds like you've gained a lot. It's time to give that part back.
Absolutely. And by the way, thank you so much, Ashley, who was asking that question, for your support with CUFI and your willingness to go back, and thank you all of you who are on this webinar for being those people and supporting Israel. We have another question. It's from Larry. He says, are the U.S. and Israel coordinating efforts to make sure each country has the necessary medical supplies to battle the coronavirus crisis?
Larry, that is a great question. Yes, and yes and no. In the beginning of this, there was a feeling that every country had to find out how to get what they needed, more or less on their own. And that was, I would say, the first several hours of this. And everybody was working the phone like they were, like it was the NFL draft. And you need to find out if somebody wants. Anyways, I'm going to go too far into that analogy. I like football. It soon became clear that you have to buy for what you need, and you have to make sure that your allies have what they need also, because a weaker Israel is a weaker America, a weaker America is a weaker Israel. And what I've been most interested in is the amount of phone calls I've received from Israel saying, what can we provide for America? And from Americans, what can we provide from Israel? And it really depends on which part of America you're in. If you were in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area, you were calling and asking for something. If you were in other places, you realized that you had enough and possibly even more than enough for the short term, and you were looking to give. And it would be nice. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of ways that we're going to learn how to be even stronger after this, in order to get that stuff to move even within America, even more effectively, but also to our allies. And I'll tell you, Larry, the communication has been instantaneous. And Israel stood by with ventilators and PPE, the same way the US has stood by with ventilators and PPE if it became necessary. There's been, this is public and recorded, what I don't like, and I'm going to say these words carefully, there have been numerous countries who have made a grand show of what they have done. A lot of it is a show. Not all of it, a lot of it is a show. Some of the countries that are working the most closely together don't need to take out a press release on what they've done. And I think when you see some of those countries and you see sort of the press that they hired with their great deeds, then maybe you have to wonder why they had to take out the press release on that. Now, it doesn't. I'm appreciative for all good deeds to every country, but you know, we have to be just like with the media. We have to be very careful readers to discern what is the truth.
Absolutely. Very true, very true. This is a question from Peter. He's actually from Canada. He says, as a Canadian CUFI member, I continue to actively push our government to follow the courageous U.S. Embassy move to Jerusalem. Any advice?
So here's where the whole decision has been made wrong. There's some feeling that this was partisan. The Jerusalem Embassy Act, passed in 1995, was one of the most bipartisan bills ever passed on a foreign policy measure. Enormously popular. It polls enormously well. And there's a reason why both of those things are accurate, is because of the truth. Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. I remember the famous story. Now, whether it was true or it's not, I don't know. It's probably true. I read in Danny Gordis's book about Menachem Begin that when Menachem Begin, who was the prime minister of Israel in the early 80s, went to go meet with Margaret Thatcher for the first time, he was asked by the media if he was going to ask Margaret Thatcher to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And he said, I will, if she asked me to recognize London as the capital of the United Kingdom. Jerusalem has been the capital of Israel for 1900 years before anybody lived in London. Now, whether any of those numbers are exactly accurate or not is less relevant. What is relevant is anybody who comes to Jerusalem, and if you've been there, come back. If you haven't been here, come and visit, knows that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. And by not recognizing that, by not acknowledging that, we push peace much further away. This is all the other countries who think that if I dangle this, that the Canadian embassy not being in Jerusalem is somehow, that's what's going to bring peace closer. All it means is a non-acknowledgement of, I don't mean to single out Canada, they're great allies and great friends in so many respects. But the Jerusalem issue shouldn't be political. Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. And that doesn't mean if Israel were to get together and in a joint way discuss with the Palestinians who may want to come to the table for peace, that they want to divide something, they want to cut. It's Israel's decision. It's not our decision. And you saw in the Trump Vision for Peace how Jerusalem was treated. And I just encourage you to read what the Israeli Arabs said about the Trump vision. Tremendous enthusiasm about it and excitement about being part of Israel. We hope the Palestinians show up and want to create a peaceful existence. But, Jerusalem is not going to be their undivided capital. There is no way, shape, form, or how of that. So therefore, putting our embassy in Jerusalem recognizes the truth, and that's an important thing to do. Telling the truth is helpful.
That is very true. Telling the truth is definitely helpful. And I love how you mentioned that Israel's not a partisan issue. Israel is for everyone. So thank you for mentioning that. Yeah. We have last two questions. So someone is asking, if we do have a change in the White House, will it be a fight to keep the embassy in Jerusalem?
Difficult to comment on what other people might do. There was an article just 2 days ago saying that Vice President Biden would keep the embassy in Jerusalem. There are a whole slew of different questions about what another administration would do or wouldn't do. I don't like to argue in the hypothetical. What I do believe is that as Americans, it is a American value to be pro-Israel. And what I don't want to see is other people's opinion on what works and what doesn't work to be considered pro-Israel or anti-Israel. I think we need every candidate who ever runs for office in this country to understand. I'd like them to be pro-America. And I assume if they're pro-America, they'll discover that being pro-Israel is part and parcel of that. There are reasonable ways to disagree. The Israeli government is not infallible and perfect, like no government is and no human being is. The difference that we have taken is this approach, and I credit again Senior Advisor Kushner and Berkowitz and Ambassador Friedman on this. But we disagree with Israel all the time. You'll just never read about it. We think that when there's daylight in between the United States and Israel, that allows all of the other issues to creep up as though that Israel has some perceived weakness. We are to a great degree their not-so-secret weapon. Why would we want to diminish the firepower of their not-so-secret weapon? We're allowed to disagree with them about stuff. They're allowed to disagree with us about stuff. They're an independent country. They just celebrated Independence Day yesterday. They're not the 51st state, and we aren't a protectorate of Israel. But we are very strong allies. And as that's the case, there's no reason. It is anti-our interest to show any weakness towards our relationship with Israel. Not for Israel's sake, for our sake. So That's really important. And I would encourage everybody, whoever you vote for, to vote, but make this an issue and demand from all of the elected officials to hold this as something as being pro-America.
Very true, very true. And last question is from Rafi. I hope I pronounced your name right. He's asking, or they're asking, do you think there will be a change in the U.S. tourist visa policy for Israelis? Do you know anything about that?
For the U.S., so that's a great question. This has been a challenging situation for a long time. And it's a very popular discussion when you get people from various embassies together. There's the visa waiver program that is either very popular or not very popular, depending on what country you are in. What I would tell you, it is in the United States of America's interest to encourage as much tourism from around the world that conforms to our national security imperatives. So that's safety, security, and protecting our workers. And to the degree that we can accomplish all of those things, it's in our interest to bring people to our country. Israelis have an added advantage, not against any other country. There are many other countries that participate in this. But again, as I pointed out, that if you look at the sectors that Israel leads in, they are job generators. It should be easy for Israelis who can generate those jobs for Americans to be able to come to America. And I don't want them to go other places. I want them to generate those jobs and innovations in America, not to other places. Not that I have anything against those other places, but if they're jobs, I want them created in the United States of America. The same thing with the tourists. You can go and see Italy, it's lovely. And you can go ahead and see New Mexico, also lovely. Where would I rather that tourist go? To New Mexico. That's the United States of America. It's a major drive for our economy, our hotels, our restaurants, our cabs, the whole thing. So we're working very hard on that. But we have to balance both of those priorities. And it's not an easy balance to do, but we're working very hard. It's a great question.
Very good, very good. Well, that is the official end of our webinar. Thank you so much to our honored guest, Aryeh Lightstone, and advisor to the ambassador, David Friedman. Such an honor to have you on, sir. Thank you for joining us. And thank you all so much for your participation in our webinar today. Thank you for your questions. We're going to end here. Please stay tuned for more live webinars that we're going to be doing on CUFI.org. You can find it there on our virtual experience. And we're going to end here. So have a blessed day. Thank you all, and God bless.
Thanks, guys.